kids hook up with other churches to go to this. So, been talking with Preacher Wayne about this kind of stuff. You know, we do we don't do YEC. We stopped doing YEC one year when I caught our kids body surfing down next to the stage. It got to be just a concert. Really didn't see a message in it that year, so we kind of stopped going to that. We do Winter Jam. I think Hearts on Fire may become an annual trek for some of our kids. First night, we got to hear Tim Tebow speak. Actually, a better speaker than I would imagine a college athlete, a pro athlete speaker. Tim's got a pretty good background in biblical training. If our kids had to look up to an athlete, what impressed me most about him was he didn't throw up the fact that, hey, look at me, I'm the one who was persecuted for bending on the knee, which is now called Tebowing. It's not called prayer anymore. It's not called kneeling. It's not called reverence to the Lord. It's called Tebowing. He had a routine that he did when he ran out of the tunnel. He did this so many times. He did 3 sprints. He picked up the ball. He throwed it so many times. He turned around and he done this, and he went to be by himself down on the corner of the end zone, and he knelt to a knee, which is now called Tebowing. He prayed. But he never once said, hey, look at me, I'm the one responsible for all this controversy because I wanted to pray. He didn't talk about himself a whole lot like that. He just said, you know, this was his routine. And he went on about it like it was his daily, like he didn't pay attention to the media and all the hoopla that they made over him kneeling. You know, some of the other professional athletes are kneeling now. Their protest to whatever. I guess a minimum wage of $140-something thousand a year is holding these people back. You know, they're being, what's the word I'm looking for? They're underprivileged. Trying to prove a point in the wrong manner. My opinion. That's Ronnie's opinion, doesn't have to be everybody else's. But really enjoyed listening to that young man speak. And we'll go back to that in just a minute. We did Hearts on Fire, 2 sessions each day. We were in the Omega session, the second session. 10,000 people, 10 to 11,000 people in that auditorium with each session. So you figure 2 sessions Friday, 2 sessions Saturday. And being able to praise and worship with 10,000 other people at one time was actually pretty cool. After the first night, we took our young people back to the bus. And we had to straighten out a couple things. And not that I'm any better or we're any better than anybody else, but we had to talk about a few things. We had to talk about the fact that when we walked into that auditorium, and I said auditorium on purpose, when we walked into that auditorium, there was no pulpit on the stage. It was a production. And I know there's a lot of good churches around us, and there's a lot of folks that have elected to set theirs up that way. I guess I am pretty dogmatic and old-fashioned about that. There was no pulpit. There was a lot of flashing lights and a lot of very loud music. And the drums, they hit. The speakers were sweet. A lot of the music was the stuff that we listened to on K-Love, and they had some guests there, Matthew somebody that did Chainbreaker and several other popular contemporary Christian songs. I mean, nothing was out of line. Nothing was out of line, but it was loud, it was exciting, it was fun. It was fun. But when we got back to the bus, I just felt like it was important to explain to our young people be careful, because there's a difference between excitement and conviction. And we had a nice long talk and a prayer. We were the last ones out of the parking lot. And that was a lot of cars and buses, a lot of cars and buses. But we stayed there and we talked it out and we prayed it out before we'd go back to the hotel. Because I was afraid that our young people, and this is what I talked to Preacher Wayne about, I was afraid that our young people was going to go to those events and there's not going to be anybody there to help explain it to them what just happened. That the excitement and the drums and the lights and the loud music and the loudspeakers and being around so many other youth and youth churches, just the whole ambiance of the arena, the area there that we were in, kind of overwhelms some folks, and they get the wrong impression. So we go back to the hotel. It's already midnight by the time we get there, and of course we got called in before we even got to our room. Hey, we're kids, they're loud. But got up next morning, went back, and there was a pastor there, a preacher there, King. I didn't look his name back up. He's from South Carolina, had a really good message. And then the music starts again, and they're back to the contemporary stuff. Well, everybody's singing along, and it's pretty loud. But I tell you, the blessing, and Tammy even noticed it. You couldn't help but notice it. When they went back to the church hymnals, when you hear 10,000+ people, 10,000+ people singing "I'll Fly Away" so loud that it drowns out the speakers that they had, you could hear the people singing over what was happening on the stage. The drums, the guitar, the bass, the piano, everything that they had up there. It had a full ensemble of a stage crew, lights flashing, everything. But when he went and blended his song in and went back to the church hymnals, it got so loud in there, it was hard to hear the music over the singing. And Tammy's like, see, everybody knows these. Everybody knows the "I'll Fly Away," the "Old Rugged Cross," the church hymnals, the "True," the "Tried the True," the songs that talk about the blood, the songs that talk about our salvation, the songs that actually have a message to them. Chainbreaker's a good song. I kind of like the song, but I think it kind of misses the mark, or I'm missing the meaning of the song one. God does release us from all of our things that are chaining us down. But let's don't look past the point that He is still over us. He still has His hand on us. We're not completely free. We're free of the things that God wants us to get away from. He'll give us the power to do that, but we're not completely free. He still has reverence over us. And that's something that our young people forget, and sometimes we forget to put in our songs, and sometimes we forget to look at that, about how God is still up here, and we're still down here. And if our young people don't have reverence for their families, for their mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, if they feel like that they could speak to us like, we're buddy-buddy, then how are they going to have reverence over the one true King? And that's the generation that we're facing, that we're raising, that we're disciplining, that we're loving on, that we're trying to mentor into this world and give them a good, solid base foundation. Tell them that they're beautiful and they're one of a kind and they're special, and yeah, that's all great. But please don't tell them they're perfect, because we're not. We've got some very beautiful young ladies in our church. We've got some very handsome young men in our church, but they're not perfect. They may be perfect in our eyes. They may be the love of our life. The first time I got to hold my grandchildren was a love like I'd never felt before, but they're not perfect. We're imperfect creatures, all of us. And there's only one that walked on this earth, that ever set foot in the dirt of this earth, that was ever perfect. And we are not equal to Him. we strive to be like him, but we're not equal to him. We had a young man in our congregation that had given a profession of faith some time back, and through the hearing of the gospel Saturday morning, he raised his hand, prayed the prayer. I don't agree with the mass salvation messages like that sometimes, but I got an opportunity to go in the back room with this young man and talk to him and pray with him, and I really believe that he accepted Christ Saturday morning. He said, you know, I've done this before, but it didn't feel like this. And we explained to him that, you know, you only do this one time. And he said, well, this time's it. And you could see through the tears in his eyes that the message moved him, and the conviction was real, and it wasn't about the loud contemporary music, and it wasn't about the lights. You could see him squirming during "I'll Fly Away." You can see the excitement building in his heart through the entire service. And through that morning meeting, we saw that young man accept Christ, truly. And it was worth the entire trip. It was worth all the walking and limping and up and down the steps and Pigeon Forge traffic. And by the way, don't use Waze in Pigeon Forge or Gatlinburg if you're driving a bus. Yeah, there's no concrete plant on the back road right across the ridge, and all the signs say 20 ton or less, 10 ton or less. Yeah, that bus is over 10 tons, so don't go back there. Don't use Waze in Pigeon Forge. Then we hustled back here, we changed clothes, and we went to Salem. Good message preached at Salem. We've been invited to a youth camp, youth meeting out in Middle Tennessee, coming up sometime this spring. Good fellowship, good message. Got to spend some time with Brother Ted Clower and speak to him just one-on-one. That was really good. Full weekend, full crazy weekend. And it was full of youth, and my mind's been wrapped around what our kids are facing and the things that we're teaching them. And I just keep resonating back to something that Tebow said. You know, all the SEC, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee jokes, you know, he just happened to talk about scenarios in his life that happened on the weekends that he beat Tennessee. You know, and he got a chuckle out of that. I think he knew where his lines were drawn. He didn't do a gator chomp on the stage. I think he knew that would have probably been stepping over the line, so he didn't do that. But it resonated with our young people about how all of us and them can be used. And I got thinking about our Sunday school class, and it's not just the young people that's been on my heart, it's us too. You know, we've not outlived our usefulness. We've not outlived the things that we can do. We might not be able to run a marathon anymore. We might not be able to, you know, haul potato sacks up the steps anymore like we used to. We might not be able to throw that hay like we used to. But we've not outlived our usefulness. I want to take this morning's Sunday school lesson in a different direction. I want to go to John chapter 6. I want to go to John chapter 6 because in the world of spiritual warfare, we have to think about what our thought process would be under different situations. And I'm trying my best to put this together without notes because it's all swimming in my head. Didn't know how to type it out last night. John chapter 6 talks about Jesus feeds the 5,000. And this is an account of what Jesus is capable of doing that's listed in all the Gospels in one form or another. But John has a little bit of detail in here I think is very, very important. And we'll take up our reading in verse 5. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes, he saw a great company coming to him, and he said unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? In my Bible, that's red letters. And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. Now keep in mind, he's talking about the men. He's talking about the 5,000 men that had gathered. And the masculine being the men, you've got to figure on too, what about the men's families? So you're talking about 10 to 15,000 people here. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him, There is a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? There's so many of us that only have a limited amount. You know, if you took my bank account and turned everything that I have over to this church, it would not operate for very long at all. You couldn't take my account. You couldn't probably take 2 of our accounts and transfer them over to the church account and expect to keep the lights on for very long at all. We might be able to go a couple months to keep the lights on, to keep the air running, to keep the sound going, to keep everything going that happens. The business side of church, the business side of ministry, just like with our youth ministry, I had a guy tell me one time, youth ministry is messy and expensive, but the most rewarding that you'll ever see. Well, I kind of halfway agree with that. Any ministry that we actually pour our hearts into is going to be rewarding beyond belief. If you pour your heart into something and it's led by God, and it's not just something that you want to do, but something that God has called you to do, it'll be rewarded beyond belief. And Jesus said, Make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in a number of about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them, that they were set down, and likewise of the fishes as much as they would. When they were filled, he said to the disciples, Gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Don't waste anything. Therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. 12 baskets left over. He didn't have 12 baskets to start with. He had somebody's lunch. And that's what Brother Tim had brought out of this whole point, was you got this young lad, and back in the definition of a young lad, you're probably talking about a middle school age person, 12, 13, 14-year-old boy. And he's heard about this guy named Jesus that's coming to his town, and he wants to go see him. So he said, Hey, Mom, how about packing me a lunch? This is the point that he was making Saturday morning. Hey, Mom, how about packing me a lunch? Because I'm going to go see this guy that they're making so much excitement over, and I want to see what he has to say. Just, how about packing me a lunch? Because I'm going to have to walk there and have to walk back, and, I'm not sure that this lad was any different than any one of us. I mean, we make our provisions for the day. Each one of us that's ever went to work and packed a lunch, you pack enough. You're not thinking about the entire office, the entire farm most of the time. You'll pack something, and if you know somebody that you're working with that sometimes forgets their lunch, you might pack an extra sandwich. You ever pack enough to feed 5,000 plus their family? Can you pack enough to feed 5,000 plus their family? This young man wanted to come and see Jesus and just brought what he had. And I guess the big point that I took out of all that was, what do you think was going through his mind? He's looking around just like our kids were looking around at that conference. There's a couple of our young people that have never been to Dollywood. They've never been around a big mass of people. They've never been around a big crowd. They don't go and do anything like that. And now all of a sudden they're getting dumped out of a church bus in the middle of 10,000, well, let's say 20,000 people, because the people in the first session were coming out as we were trying to go in. We're dumping those young people out in the middle of 20,000 people. When we go to Winter Jam, they lock the doors. They sell out. Thompson Bowling Arena, whatever, 28,000 people. If we get there late and I have to go park the bus, guess who gets to sit in the bus? Listen to the show from the outside. Because they will lock the doors once they get at capacity. And we dumped our young people out in the middle of 20,000 people, parked the bus, waded through trying to find everybody, and they're just overwhelmed and thinking, I'm just a little bitty speck in the middle of this 20,000 people. Well, think about you right now. You're just a little bitty speck in the middle of this great big universe that's in the palm of God's hands. How can I make a difference? How can I even matter? Well, I'm telling you, God loves you. He knew you before you were, and you do matter. And there's things that He's got for you to do, whether you're a young lad or whether you're an old fogey. He's got things for you to do. He's got things for us to do, even if you can't run a race anymore. I mean, this weekend, my knees are spent. I can't do it anymore like that. Some of our kids wanted to walk around Saturday morning before we went over to the LeConte Center. We got about a block, and it was time to turn around and come back. It was cold. My knees were aching. I couldn't do it anymore. But God's still got a purpose for us. Even though we can't walk or run a marathon, even though we can't physically do the things that we once were able to do, He's still got a plan for us. He's still got stuff for us to do. That lad brought what he had. And the problem that we have is we think what we have is not good enough. I don't have enough to give. I can't pay the light bill for this beautiful building for 2 months in a row out of my salary. I don't have enough to give. I can't buy all the Awana materials that we need for our kids for this year. I can't personally. I can't. But what else can we do that God's called us to do? God's laid something on our heart, whether it to be to cook, to clean the bus, the van, the listener, the teacher, the prayer warrior. If we can't do anything else, we can pray for our young people. We can pray for each other. But there's always something that we can do. But we worry too much about, oh, we were insufficient, we can't do this. And that, I think, sometimes gets passed down to our kids. And this lad is holding his lunch thinking, first of all, no, this is my lunch. I'm going to eat this later. I'm going to be hungry when I'm walking back home. This is my lunch. I didn't bring this for everybody else. That's the human side in us. This is mine. And second of all, he's looking at this and like, it's not enough. This is all I got to give, but it's not enough. Okay, that's our first mistake, is trying to tell Jesus that we can do multiplication better than He can. It's not up to us to multiply the product. God asks for everything that we have, the best that we have, all that we have, whenever we have it. It's not up to us to multiply that. And when we dumped our kids out there in the middle of 20,000 other people and they feeling so insignificant, and then they hear the message that you are enough. You know, a lot of our kids, they don't feel like they're enough. Our girls don't feel like they're pretty enough. Our boys don't think they're muscular enough. Our teenagers just don't think that they're enough. And so many of our young people think about ending their lives. And so many of our young people turn to other things so they feel like that they are enough. I'm talking about drugs and alcohol and sex and the things that the world throws at them. They get themselves involved in that so they'll feel like that they are enough. Well, Jesus proved right here that His mathematics are better than ours. His multiplication is better than ours. He took this little bitty lunch meal and fed the 5,000. Okay, the Bible says 5,000 men. He fed the 10 to 15,000. And you're looking around that LeConte Center and you're thinking, there's 10,000 of us in here right now. Just people watching. Just people in chairs. And you got half a dozen sandwiches? How's that going to work? That's our fault. That's our disbelief. That's our human nature and trying to reason with it. Let God show off with what you've got. That was my entire point to our young people once we got to talk about that later. Let God show off with what you have to offer. If you'll give yourself to Him, if you will surrender to what His will is and His calling for you, if you will just say, God, I'm yours. Let Him do the multiplication for that. Let Him take what you have, all that you have, and sit back and watch Him multiply that. Don't be afraid of what could happen. You think that young man might have been afraid that they're going to fuss at him because he didn't bring enough food? Look down on him because his fish wasn't as good as somebody else's? Look down on him because maybe his bread was a little bit older than somebody else's was? He just gave what he had. And Jesus did the multiplication. Jesus fed them all. Not only did He feed them all, He's like, watch this. I'm going to feed them all and have 12 baskets left over. Because we're not going to waste anything. Every one of us has a talent of some type. Every one of us still has a breath in our body. You walked into this building this morning and you have a breath in your body. Every one of us is capable of a smile or a prayer. Even if we're not capable of throwing somebody up over our shoulder and dragging them in here, you have the power to pray. You have the power to smile. You have the power to reach that hand out and shake somebody's hand and make them feel like that they matter. You have the power to give of yourself. Jesus has the power to make that multiply. That's what I had for this morning. Anybody got any comments or questions? Thanks for listening. A couple of announcements before we get started, and Preacher Wayne's probably going to announce this again too. We've got some young folks in our Awana ministry that are disadvantaged, and we're going to be doing a tree, an angel tree out here. Right now we're going through our groups, and we're going to pick